Hi, welcome to the 14-day weather forecast. In recent days there has been lots of speculation in some sections of media about the possibility of much colder weather returning as we head through the first half of February. Is there any truth in that? Well, let's take a look. Now, here's the view across Europe and the North Atlantic at 18 GMT on Tuesday the 4th. There's a band of rain which is clearing eastwards there, and with winds coming in from the west, from the Atlantic, it's not really cold anywhere. But as I run the sequence, a big change indeed starts to take place. High pressure builds up across the UK, so it's turning more settled, and as it becomes centred slightly further northwards and eastwards, we get an easterly flow, a continental flow, pushing right across Western Europe, across the UK, so it will be turning colder. But just how cold? Well, I'll look at that a little bit later. Also, there's some white shading showing up there near to eastern coastal counties, indicating the possibility of wintry showers. There's also some indications that there could be showery outbreaks of rain, sleet and snow moving westwards across England and maybe Wales at this point. Now, as I run the sequence, what we see is high pressure really stays dominant, and we keep that easterly continental flow through the rest of the first week. But the white shading has gone at this point, and if anything, the indications here are that precipitation will be turning back to rain. Now, let's have a look at the jet stream and 850 HPA temperature sequence to see if that casts any light on what's happening. At the start of the period, the jet stream is here, the modelled shaded area. It's close to the UK. If you remember on these charts, on these sequences, it's the dark blues and purples which indicate the very cold air. As I run this, we see the high pressure building and that colder easterly feed, at least for a time. But you probably noticed that the blue shading there wasn't very deep, so the air aloft, although it is cold for a time, it's not unusually cold. And through the second half of the first week towards the end here, that blue shading is mixed out. The air aloft is starting to lose its chill. That probably indicates why on the precipitation animation we saw the rain, sleet and snow increasingly turning back to rain only towards the end of the first week. It's worth noting though that with this type of setup, even though the air aloft isn't particularly cold, it's not really that far from the average by this point, after the initial cold pool moves away, it could still be a very raw down at the surface. Let's see if that is the case with some of the forecast charts. The initial ones here are from the UKV model. They show a picture on Wednesday. It's really dry everywhere, just a few showers dotted around, and temperatures at this stage not far from the average, about 8 degrees in the south, a few degrees lower there in Scotland and Northern Ireland. Now, moving forwards to Thursday, temperatures are starting to dip a little bit, but not a great deal. Dry really everywhere, some bright and sunny periods, so probably quite good walking weather. As we head forwards now, this is looking at the picture on Friday, we're seeing temperatures are dipping, it's turning a good deal colder there, only 3 or 4 Celsius in central and eastern England. Also, on the right hand side of the sequence here is showing the risk of some rain, sleet and snow pushing into southeastern counties and maybe East Anglia for a time there. And there are 1 or 2 heavier bursts being indicated. So with the cold picture, I think accumulating snow at this stage is quite unlikely. It does look quite messy if this precipitation turns up at all, but there could be a few flakes at least to look out for. And here is the snow depth accumulation chart for the same period. You can see if you look very closely there, just to the southeast of London, it's suggesting there could be a dusting for a short time. Mostly though, it's up to the high ground in the north there, the Scottish mountains, where there could well be some accumulations. Forwards to a Saturday, and it's a similar story really, but at this point the precipitation, which is moving westwards, is increasingly falling as rain rather than sleet and snow, and it fits in with the GFS sequence which I used at the beginning, and that would also at least suggests that air temperatures aloft are beginning to lose the colder values. We're getting the cold pool at 1,500 metres above sea levels moving away, and although we've still got that easterly flow, it's now increasingly rain which is falling, but still raw. The GFS charts for Sunday and Monday, because the UKV doesn't reach this far ahead, paint a fairly chilly picture, but not notably so. You can see values here, 5 to 8 degrees in the south, a couple of degrees lower maybe in the north. The Scottish Highlands, they're obviously pretty cold, but at this stage as well, it's dry really more or less everywhere. So back to the pleasant weather for walking. There will be some very cold nights though. The extent of a frost risk is going to be dependent upon the cloud cover. So initially, you can see here, Thursday morning, a widespread frost across much of the UK. And then by Saturday, temperatures in central and eastern England, as we get that cloud and precipitation moving in, are not as low. They're staying above freezing point, so the risk of frost there mostly in Scotland, Northern England and Northern Ireland. The Mogreps G temperature chart for Berkhamsted I've used today, so in the home counties rather than London. I just wanted to get away from the urban heat island a little bit to illustrate the profile through the first week, at least in southern Britain. It won't be that different elsewhere. You can see initially it's actually rather mild, up to about 10 Celsius, but there's a general trend downwards through the first few days. So it is becoming colder, but I asked the question to begin with, how cold will it be? On this, maximums are always around 4 or 5 degrees Celsius, so it's cold but not very cold. That's the message at this stage at least. Now the snow risk, this is using data from the GEFS model. Each of the stamps on here show the forecast snow depth from one of the runs in it between Friday the 7th and Wednesday the 12th. The message here is accumulating snow is most likely over high ground. There's a low risk in southern and central areas, but it's not discounted. There could be a dusting there, as I've already suggested. And for Mogreps G, comparable animation, this is the ensemble model which the UK Met Office runs, also indicates a low risk of accumulating snow. It's a higher resolution model, so you get more grid points than on the GEFS, so it's a little bit smoother. The time steps are also at 3 hours rather than 6 hours. So it does give a slightly different picture, but it tends to be more accurate in my view in terms of accumulating snow, and it's pointed towards a low risk. Now rainfall, the 0 to 5 day accumulations from the ECM and GFS models, only significant in the northwest of Britain, single digits there elsewhere. And then moving forwards to the 0 to 10 day period, the amounts have not increased a great deal, particularly on the GFS chart on the right, maybe more so on the ECM model, which is on the left. So I would suggest this indicates there will be a lot of dry weather around. That ties in with the idea that high pressure will be building. Even though it's going to be turning colder, it often goes hand in hand with more settled conditions. So in more general terms, how do the deterministic models compare with each other as we head towards the end of the first week? Here is the GFS on Tuesday the 11th of February. We've got the high pressure there to the northeast. There's still this easterly flow, rather chilly, but not exceptionally so. The Canadian model is similar at the same time. The icon, fairly similar as well, maybe more of a southerly element to this. The ECM model, also high pressure there to the northeast. The ECM artificial intelligence model, this is in recent days I think been the cold weather fan's best friend, and it probably indicates here more of a cold pool over the United Kingdom. Finally, the UK Met Office global model, the high pressure over Scandinavia, but once more, we're not really tapping into a very, very cold source of air. It's not like the beast from the east period in February, March 2018. So, towards the end of the first week, it's looking chilly, it's looking rather cold. There could be a few showers around. Nothing very notable though. How do things shape up though as we head through the second week? Could we be going colder or will temperatures be trending back towards the average? Well, a good deal of uncertainty, of course, at this range. Here is the 16-day GEFS plot for London. 850 HPA temperatures across the top. The message is close to average. It's really not looking very cold at all. They are a little bit below the norm to begin with. You can see the thick purple line there and the thick black line. The thick purple is below it, so that's suggesting below the 30-year average for time. But the trend here is slightly upwards later on particularly. There is quite a big spread. There are one or two runs in the mix which are bringing in deep cold, presumably from the east, but the majority are not. In terms of precipitation, rain and snow along the bottom, not very many spikes there, although the number is increasing towards the end of the second week, so perhaps suggesting that things could be turning a little bit more changeable. The snow row along the very bottom, which shows the number of runs forecasting at least one or two flakes of snow to fall, not necessarily accumulate on a given day. The maximum value for the second week is at the start there, it's 7. Really, the values thereafter stay very low indeed. It's just worth possibly highlighting that through the first week, we do reach 21 at one point. So as I've been saying, there could be a few flakes of snow around in the south of England during that first week. But all in all, it's not given a signal for very cold conditions. Because of the speculation around at the moment, I just wanted to cross-reference the GEFS data with the European ensemble, which most people think is better, and I also believe it is. The statistics show that, but the differences between it and the GEFS are not huge. On this occasion, it's painting a similar picture to the GEFS, as it often does. You can see temperatures there trending upwards as we go through the second week, becoming slightly above the norm. So there is good agreement there between the two models. The 2-metre temperature data tables for London, so using data from the GEFS once again, show a warming trend. There's lots of dark green through the days to begin with. Those are cold runs, but then the light green, maximums of between 6 and 10, increases and it becomes the dominant colour. Also, there's some yellow showing up 11 to 15, so those runs going from mild conditions, and that is always a possibility. It depends on how that high pressure to the northeast becomes orientated. There's always a chance that we could pull up some warmer air, and I think that's what some of these runs are going for. For the overnight lows, well, lots of blue. I was going to say a fair amount of blue. Those runs going sub-zero. Lots of dark green would be a more accurate reflection. So quite cold nights, and that seems to be continuing through the second week, an ongoing chance of frost. Up to Manchester, very, very similar. Along the bottom, there are more precipitation spikes, but the snow row values are staying low through the second week. The 2-metre temperatures for Manchester following a similar trend, albeit at slightly lower values. There's less yellow showing up there towards the end of the second week, and perhaps a greater risk of frost continuing through the nights. Glasgow, well, this is interesting because the GEFS is keeping 850 HPA temperatures below the 30 norm really through the second week, and also along the bottom there are more spikes, so greater risk of rain and snow, because you can see the snow row values are notably higher, but they're not very high, between sort of 10 and 14. They can go up to 33, so I'd suggest a low to moderate chance of snow falling on any individual day through the second week. But I wanted to bring up the ECM ensemble for this location as well, because it's a little bit different. Unlike the London chart, which the two ensembles were consistent, here we've got the ECM bringing in close to average 850 HPA temperatures. There is, of course, a big spread there, but this isn't really signalling a cold second week in the north of the UK. So some uncertainty, I think, about just what will be developing at this stage, especially in the north. The 2-metre temperature data tables from the GEFS for Glasgow, there is lots of dark green and only a very, very slow warming trend there later on. The overnight lows, lots of blue continuing to appear. So the GEFS at least is going for a rather cold second week in the north of the UK. The 850 HPA temperature GEFS postage stamps are worth seeing. These are for the period Wednesday the 12th to Monday the 17th. And the dark blue shading, the purple shading, is the very cold air. It's a similar temperature scale, colour scale to what I showed earlier on some of the other sequences. The message here is for a lot of the individual runs in the GEFS are showing a chilly air mass over the UK early on, but most are not bringing in very cold air. And later, the trend is for the temperatures at this level to be rising, especially in the southern half of the UK. In terms of snow depth, it's just worth taking a look at the postage stamps for this as well. It's the same time period. Accumulating snow is most likely over high ground and in the north. There's a low risk in southern and central areas, but it is not discounted. Rainfall through the second week using the ECM ensemble charts. These each show the chance of 5 millimetres or more of rainfall on individual days. So these are the first 3 days of the second week. Not very high chances really anywhere apart from perhaps in the southwest, and that's quite interesting because it could suggest that we've got areas of low pressure pushing up from the southwest, and that's always an interesting development when there's an easterly flow across the UK, because it would at least bring the potential for some longer periods of sleet and snow across the southern half of the UK. Moving forwards to the following 3 days, maybe just ensemble scatter. Looking further ahead, the range of solutions starts to increase, but these are suggesting a greater chance of significant amounts of rain, and who knows, possibly a few of the runs going for snow in places. The mean surface level pressure data table for York, so going through the second week, shows the trend is downwards. There's lots of orange to begin with. Those runs going for between 1,026 and 1,040 millibars, so strongly high pressure dominated ones. But as we head through the second half there, the amount of green starts to increase significantly. Those are low pressure dominated runs. So it's really throwing in some uncertainty, but the trend is downwards. Whether or not we see an Atlantic flow returning, I think is very doubtful, but there could be a push towards more changeable conditions, especially in the west of the United Kingdom. The GEFS snapshot pressure chart for Friday, the 14th February, Valentine's Day. Well, taken at face value, we've got high pressure to the east, to the northeast, and maybe a continental flow with areas of low pressure there to our west. But remember that this is generated by averaging out all of the individual runs, so it is not always representative of the most likely scenario. The European ECM ensemble chart for the same time is quite similar. High pressure there to the northeast, maybe a continental feed or a southerly feed perhaps. The UK, as often seems to be the case, could well be in no man's land at this point between the cold continental air masses to the east and the mild Atlantic ones to the west. I just wanted to show this animation. It's generated using the ECM artificial intelligence deterministic model, so it's not an ensemble and it should not, of course, be taken at face value. But it was interesting, I think, because it shows that possibility of high pressure to the north and east, at least to begin with. And it's not a very good example of this type of thing, but to an extent it illustrates it. We've got low pressure pushing up from the southwest, and were it to bump into colder air over the UK, it could, on its leading edge, produce some heavy sleet and snow. It is just something, it's a low risk, something though to keep an eye on. So to summarise, week 1, outbreaks of rain clear eastwards, it becomes mostly dry and temperatures dip as high pressure builds. The risk of frost increases, and as an easterly flow develops, there could well be some showery rain, sleet and even snow spreading westwards for a time. But I don't think amounts of snow are going to be significant. Week 2, rather cold early on, with frost being quite widespread. The snow risk remains the highest in the north, particularly early on. Later, temperatures probably trend upwards and it may start to become more changeable in the west. But I've put the caveat in there at the bottom. As I've mentioned earlier, the UK could well be in no man's land between the cold continental and milder Atlantic air masses, but a very cold, or at least cold easterly flow could persist. It could even become reinvigorated, and the risk of more widespread snow is not ruled out. That said, it isn't the most likely scenario at this point. So there we have it. Cold weather is on the way back, at least for a time. Things possibly becoming more nondescript as we head through the second week. That no man's land scenario which I've outlined. Now, finally, I suspect one or two people may ask me in the comments or on social media, why have I not mentioned the possibility of a sudden stratospheric warming event? Well, there are two reasons for it. The first being that even if one were to occur, it wouldn't have an impact on the weather during the time period that I've been covering. And the second is that, in my own view, it often adds an extra level of abstraction to the forecast, which isn't always very helpful. So that is why. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video and found it useful. As ever, if you have done, then please consider hitting the like button below and subscribing to the channel if you've not done so already. In that way, you'll not miss any of my future updates. Remember, of course, as well, to stay up to date with the day-to-day weather developments by checking out the TheWeatherOutlook.com website. Thanks very much now. Bye.